Hey, greetings, Fred in Alaska. Thanks for joining me. What I wanted to share with you today comes from, well, the Holokuk River. Now, it'd be due north of Dillingham, quite a ways. It's outside of the Wood-Tikchik State Park. I have maps that I will integrate here in just a few minutes. I'll give you an overview map right now. Let me move off to the side, pick a side, there we go, and I'll integrate the map here. So Daniel, his nickname's Danny, prefers that, was a pilot for the Navy in Vietnam. He got injured a couple times and was medically retired, and decided, I'm going to go north, seek my fortune, maybe bush pilot, this type of thing. So Daniel was inspired by Craig sharing, and this is another gentleman who wanted to share his experience before leaving us. He's older, he has some health problems, and he felt it necessary that people understand exactly what you could potentially be dealing with. However, the difference between Craig's experience, where he was he heard screams and then, had the sighting and basically unmolested outside of being freaked out. Daniel's experience was different. Danny had a totally different experience. Very, very similar circumstances, how it plays out. But so him and this guy, Christopher, who at that time, this is late 70s, was still active military. Christopher has since passed, so we'll just leave it as Christopher. And so Daniel was very detail oriented, which I sincerely appreciate. I had to get him to tell me the meat and potatoes of the story, and then I asked the details, because he was, giving me approximate winds and, very, very detail oriented, which I appreciate. And he was, again, inspired by Craig's experience. However, this happened probably about 7-8 years prior to what Craig dealt with. So him and Christopher, they happened to be with some free time, and Christopher was on leave from the military, and he had a couple weeks, almost 30 days, but just a couple weeks for this particular trip, that they wanted to get out and really go to the middle of nowhere, Alaska. And it so happens they just kind of sat there and just dropped a finger right there on the map. And I'll show that right now. I'll show it right now. Anyway, so they decide, hey, we'll go out there and we'll just check it out. They were going to just see what was out there, just kind of figure it out. So after searching, they finally found a little spot to land, basically gravel bar. Wasn't horrible as from what he was saying, and they landed the small bush plane. I believe it was a stall 172 or something in that range. He named like 3 or 4 different craft that he had flown, but I believe this one was the stall. And they get there, and from what he said, they decided just right off that gravel, there was brush and stuff, and there was a little bit of a clearing where 2 valleys branched out. And they found it perfect because wind would come down the valleys, but at this particular point, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of wind, and perfect. It was in the fall. The mosquitoes were still out, but with the winds just being strong enough, not overly, forceful winds, it was enough to keep the bugs down. So they set up their camp, and for the first 2 nights, they stayed right near camp. They were just hanging out, they were both armed with M14s, and Daniel had a 1911, a Colt 1911 45. It was his service weapon in Vietnam. And so was the rifle, actually. anyway, we won't get into the ins and outs of how he kept his gear. Irrelevant. So they were both armed, substantial rifles, you know, nothing to worry about. They said the first couple nights they had noticed bears coming and going, very large bears, grizzly bears, and they weren't overly concerned because from what they were seeing from the bears would wind them and poof, be gone, just tear on out of there, right? Again, this is approximately 78, 79. Now, after on the third morning, they decide they're going to go up this valley. And they go up this valley approximately a mile. And they get up in there, and they're staying to the campsite of this valley off of the point. So they get up in there. And once they got about a mile in, they heard a weird noise. It was a loud growl, but it was reverberating from a distance, and it totally threw him off. He thought maybe, just by the way the sound was traveling, that maybe one of the big grizzly bears got caught and wedged in between some rocks and was just kind of bellowing growl. You know, that's the closest thing he could approximate to that sound at the time. And so him and Christopher like, well, let's see if we can check this out. You know, let's see. I mean, maybe there's a bear that needs to be put down out of its misery or something, or maybe, you know, let's just check it out. So they continue a little further. He said they got maybe 100 more yards, and the brush was pretty thick. Where they were pushing through was about waist high, and it was really starting to get tangled up and really hard to move. And off to as they're facing, it would be approximately west-southwest going down this valley. They noticed the smaller, not quite a full-blown valley, but it's kind of hard to explain. I'll put an example, a sample photo. I'll put up a sample photo so you guys can see approximately what I'm talking about. It's not exact, it's not from there, but it'll give you an idea. So they see the smaller valley, and that's where the sound was coming from. And Daniel said that as they got to a point of like, screw this, there's no way we're going to make it through this brush to get up in there. I mean, the rifles are getting caught up, their packs are getting caught up on all the brush, and they're just making a whole shit ton of noise going through this brush. The growl happens again, but a lot closer, and they saw a dark spot approximately, it would be 150 yards off to their left at direction they're facing was noon. It would be at their 10 o'clock position that they noticed this dark, very dark spot up in the brush. And they could tell from that distance it was very large. And that's when the scream happened, right? He said the scream was pretty standard air raid, low pitch up into a real high squeal kind of sound. No sooner than they were in shock, like, what the hell is that? They got their rifles up immediately. These are both combat veterans. They had no qualms about getting busy with their firearms. None at all. And not knowing what the hell that noise was, they're immediately on point, you know. Christopher's like, should we put some shots on it? And, you know, Daniel's like, no, kill that noise. We don't even know what that is, you know, because at that distance, they couldn't make out exactly what it was. It was just dark and black at that point and in the brush. Now, right after their brief little conversation about shooting, off to their right, across the little valley, up into another little crux of the opposite side of this little valley, comes a second scream. Identical to the first, but the tone was higher pitched and not as low as the one that came from their left. So immediately they're like, okay, something's going on here far beyond what we were expecting. They had been there a couple days and didn't hear anything except some bears, you know, and, you know, saw a moose at a distance, but there was wasn't a whole lot of wildlife activity outside of the, you know, couple bears they saw in the moose, and they couldn't pinpoint what the hell these noises were. So they both had a quick powwow right there on the spot and said, we'll just backtrack. Let's just get out of here. Obviously, we're somewhere we're not supposed to be. Daniel said they turned around and started heading out. Now, I'll show the map right here. So what you're looking at is the blue dot is where they were, and it would be to the lower portion of the map would be the red dot where the first screen came from. I'll label them, and then the second red dot, second screen. Now, on their way back, just retreating, not fast, just going through like they did on the way in, there will be an aqua dot. That dot, that marker, is where the rocks and brush and stuff started coming in. Daniel said the rock throwing was very accurate. He said that they were not hit. However, it was evident that this thing throwing the rocks was intent on making it clear that they could be gotten with the rocks. I asked, well, you know, what gave you that? What gave you that feeling? And he said it was just how accurate the rocks were being thrown. He said from the second rock, that the first one they noticed, but they couldn't tell what it was because it kind of came in low and through the brush and landed right in front of them, right? And so, you know, it was, what the hell? He thought maybe a bigger rock had tumbled down and then it broke apart and then one of the pieces came tumbling. Yeah, he, you know, reasoning it away. He said, however, the second rock that came in damn near hit the first rock as they got closer. So where they were, the first rock was just about 20 feet in front of them, busted through the brush and stuff and landed damn near right on the trail in front of them, that same one they came in on, Old Game Trail. And then the second one a moment later, when they're about 10 feet from where that first rock hit, that's where the second one came and damn near hit the first rock. And that's where he gauged the accuracy part of it. He said he couldn't have thrown a baseball any better, you know. And they didn't know the exact distance these rocks were coming from, but they were very high velocity when they came in. And so once that second rock hit, Daniel said Christopher started yelling out loud and was turned around facing away from him and had his rifle up. And from what Daniel said, when he turned around at about 60 yards, this thing was standing up in the brush and was looking at them and looked like it was trying to stretch what little neck it had, but it was sniffing the air and was kind of licking at the air and sniffing. And he said it was the damnedest thing he had ever seen. He said it looked Neanderthal, had real wide jaw, real pronounced brow. The skin looked to be real dark, kind of like a tan color, like a real old baseball mitt, right? And he couldn't make out the eyes at that distance, but they appeared to be just black. And he said it had to be every bit of 10 to 11 feet tall, very, very wide, very aggravated is the word he used. He said it looked to be a very dark brown, like a chocolate brown into like a black almost. He said once he saw what Christopher was aiming at, and you know it was sniffing, licking in the air, he got a hold of Christopher and said, "Don't shoot." So immediately he says, "Get behind me, Christopher, and start going down the trail. You know, you go 20 paces, stop, turn around, cover, and then I will." So Christopher does this thing. He goes 20 paces and just past where the rocks had landed and turns around and gives Daniel the signal, you know, that he was in position or whatever. And Daniel started walking backwards. And he said he got about 3 steps walking backwards and tripped over some of the brush, because you got to understand how dense this particular area was. Again, refer to that photo, that sample pic. Thick underbrush, you know, and they weren't in any trees. It was all shrubs. It was all willows and whatnot, right? And little alder shrubs, berry bushes, things of this nature. Nothing over where they were. Nothing was over waist height. So he trips back, and as he stands up, he notices the one was still there, right? Didn't move. However, there was a second one about 100 yards from him, and it would be approximately at the 1 o'clock position in front of him, with the big one at the 11 o'clock position. So he's got them both inside as he stands back up. And so he takes a deep breath, and he's trying to calm himself because it's not making it, it's not computing what they're looking at. So he figured they were cavemen in the moment, and was like, this is fucking weird shit. He starts backing up, and he gets to a certain point where he's almost tripped again after a couple steps backwards, and realizes he can't. He's got to watch the trail and trust that Christopher is going to be on point if they try to rush him or whatever from behind. So he turns around and walks. And when he gets to Christopher, he says, let's just stay immediately together. Let's not do this back and forth thing. Kind of like the leapfrog deal, right? He said, let's just stay together. One of us will pace backwards while the other one kind of guides the way, so we know we're not tripping over anything, and someone will keep a bead on these things, low ready, not pointing directly at the creatures, right? So they got a distance to go. At the point of where the rocks started getting thrown and things turned to an aggressive nature, they were still almost 3/4 of a mile from their camp. So they do their best. They go along, and these things stayed where they were. They didn't come forward. They stayed where they were. After some distance, and they were kind of quasi out of sight because of the terrain and stuff, they stopped the one walking backwards thing, and they both trotted along, made their way back, got to camp, and decided to move the camp down onto the gravel bar. By time they got back down to where camp was, it was getting too dark for them to take off and all that kind of thing, and they felt more secure back at camp because things had calmed down. They heard songbirds, they heard birds chirping, and so things calmed down. Well, they moved their camp, and basically they had set up their tent right underneath the wing of the plane, right? So the plane's right beside them. So they got a nice fire going right there, a little ways away from the plane, but, to where they can, heat up coffee and what have you. He said, as they were sitting there discussing what had happened early in the day, some hours had passed, right? They got back, things were calm, they weren't antsy anymore. They were just kind of blown away talking to each other about, wow, that's crazy. And Daniel had brought up one of the guys he served with talking about the rock apes in Vietnam. So he was sharing those stories with Christopher. And he said it came to time to go to sleep. They were both getting real tired. They were still amped up from the experience and not knowing what to make of it. And his last thought before going to lay down was, he had mentioned to Christopher, the rock apes were violent. They were called rock apes because they were throwing rocks and what have you, right? And they kind of chuckled because this thing was just throwing rocks earlier. Well, Christopher couldn't sleep. He was way too amped up, and so Daniel says, I'm going to catch some winks. Once you start getting tired, let me know. I'll get up and I'll take watch, and we'll play it safe. We got firearms. We're good to go. From what Daniel said, he no sooner laid down in his rucksack and was just starting to relax enough to fall asleep to where, bam, 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 a mag dump started. Christopher started shooting. He had kept the door of the tent open, and as he opens his eyes, shocked, he sees Christopher standing on this side of the fire closest to him, firing off into the darkness, right? He jumps up, retrieves his rifle, and starts yelling, where's it at? What are you shooting at? What are you shooting at? What is it doing? He says, it came in. It was on all fours. It came in. I watched it as it started getting closer. It showed its teeth. And from what he said, Christopher told him, this thing showed its teeth and kind of took a couple quick trotting steps to him, covering like 30 feet like that, and that freaked him out. He stood up and started firing over it a couple shots. Then it stood up, turned, and ran off into the darkness, and he just trailed a couple shots over their head just to keep this thing back. Immediately Daniel's on point. He's looking all around. they're not hearing anything. There's no brush movement. It's well on in the dark. So they stoke the fire, and they keep themselves from staring at the fire so they don't lose what night vision they had, right? Well, from what Daniel said, they both sat there, taking turns stoking the fire, keeping an eye, and every once in a while looking around, not seeing anything, dead quiet. He said they were sitting there, and where they had rolled some rocks over by the plane right in front of the tent with the fire in front of them, because they wanted to, again, keep a field of fire, and the plane was just basically right beside and behind them off to their left-hand side. Daniel said that as they were sitting there, they kept hearing the plane kind of make noises like the wind was blowing, right? But there was no wind at this point. He said he'd look around. He wasn't seeing anything. Nothing. He wasn't picking up anything. He was looking under the struts and looking around and, standing up, half circled the plane, looking, not seeing anything, right? Again, it's pretty dark. And so he sat back down. A little while later, it did it again. And he's just like, what the hell's going on with this plane? So he stands and goes around the front by the prop. And when he said he got lined up with the propeller, with the fire off to his left-hand side, kind of looking off to the left-hand side of the wing, he said he saw it standing there about 2 feet above the wing, staring right back at him. And as it's watching him, it puts his hand on the wing and just pushes it a little bit. Like that, with eye contact. He said it freaked him out, and he started putting shots that way. He said he tried to make his fire accurate. He said he assumes anywhere between 4 to 6 rounds on this thing as it was fleeing, because he lowered down so he didn't tear up his wing. Popped those shots off. At that time, Christopher was standing, like looking all around. Total freak out session, right? Which I could totally imagine. He said that the way it looked, he very slight, faint look at this thing, and he saw the reflection of the fire in its eyes. That's what initially caught his attention, because he said this particular one was all black. It didn't seem to be as big as the other one. This one appeared to be 8 to 9 feet tall, right? Totally boggled him. He was very, very, he couldn't fathom what was going on, right? He said it was just unreal panic, pandemonium. He said he had been in serious firefights in Vietnam where people were dying all around him, and he didn't feel this kind of primal fear, right? So after popping those shots, a little while later, there was some screams off in the distance, and rocks started falling towards their fire pit, right? So he said these had to have been arced throws, because they were coming down, almost straight down from the sky and hitting the fire. He said it was accurate as hell, and any artilleryman would have been proud to have those kind of accurate shots from a distance, because he said from the noises, he was guesstimating a couple 100 yards distance that these things were at this time, right? And these rocks were raining down and accurately hitting inside that fire pit every time. Boom. And he said that it wasn't like a rapid cadence of rocks falling. He said it was more random in nature, but there'd be at least 2 to 3 every time rocks were being thrown. So not wanting to get hit, they were standing back, and they were looking out into the darkness, and they would know the rocks were hitting, because obviously the sound of the rock, poof, embers were getting bounced around. Their fire was basically being put out from a distance, right? So with that going on, he went right into the plane and retrieved. He had several different types of flashlights and dug them out. They had a couple of the Coleman lanterns. They got those on deck and put the Coleman lanterns back on the tail wings, right? One on each side, to put light off at a distance, not have it right in their face, and basically had flashlights ready to go. They had, Daniel said he had 3 flashlights, full batteries, and Christopher had 2. So they didn't want to be without light, especially with the nature of what was going on around them. Screams started happening, weird whistles, very crisp, sharp whistles off in the darkness in the distance. Imitation wolf howls happened, owl hoots. A couple times it sounded like a rabbit dying. It was a whole bunch of different types of weird noises that were unnatural. They were way too loud and projected way too hard. And basically, they had to deal with that shit. Rocks falling off and on. Luckily, none of them were hitting the plane. But the fire pit was a regular target because there were still embers in there. And every once in a while, Christopher would try to stoke it and keep it going a little bit. That was Daniel's idea. He figured, give them a target that's not us. At one point, they did lose one of the lanterns. It was hit by a rock on the wing of the tail, the little tail wing or whatever. It didn't hit the wing itself. The rock came in. He said it looked like just a straight shot and knocked it off and busted it on the ground. And the rock continued a little ways, almost hitting the strut for the wing. He said that's when he started randomly firing into the darkness. He got real worried that the plane was going to be damaged in some way and they were going to be stuck there. And so he wanted to mitigate his, risks and start popping shots. He said he's not proud of that, but in the moment he didn't know what else to do and figured, well, there ain't no one else fucking around here. So it's only them out there. So my chances are good that it'll at least winging some shots by them will keep them at bay, right? So randomly he would pop off shots. He'd have Christopher pop off shots at weird noises off in the distance. So the rest of that evening into the morning, which he said was just a few more hours after the lamp got knocked off, the Coleman lantern got knocked off the tail wing, he said a few hours later it started getting the light out. And they immediately, because they were so sidetracked, he kept watch while Christopher started packing stuff up, and then he started packing stuff up while Christopher kept watch. And he said that's how they spent the time after popping shots off for a while, getting ready. And they undid their tie downs. They had just pounded some sticks into the ground for tie downs or whatever for the wings. They tended to those, had everything ready to go. And so as they were sitting there, they both, at this point, needed to drag the tail from the position it was in and turn it around so they can have enough runway once it got light enough for him to see to take off, right? However, as it was getting light enough, the wind was in the wrong direction, right? So what he was going to have to do is taxi down this gravel bar, turn it around, and then take off coming back towards where they had their camp, right? So once it got light enough, he had Christopher jump in. He jumped in, fired up, sitting there. They're looking around. They're not seeing anything. It had been quiet for a while at this point. And Daniel said it was the weirdest thing. He felt a sense of peace once he fired up the plane. He felt like everything had stopped. Like whatever weird attack or stalking was going on or hunting was going on, he felt like right then and there he had a weight lifted off his chest. And I was like, well, was it like that primal fear kind of weight lifted? He was like, no, it was more like the sense of relief because the plane's running now and we can get going, right? So he did his taxi. He taxied down. He turns around, and just as soon as he was relined up, he hammered down. He got up to speed, and just as he lifted off, as soon as he gained about 80 feet in altitude, he'd have to bank off to his left because, again, they had camped out right at the end of these two valleys, right? And so he starts his climb and he starts banking off to the left. Nothing hard because he didn't want to stall out. But as they were banking, Christopher said, they're down there. So they circle around and they come back over, and they're at about 150 feet, he said, coming crossways across the valley before banking off to the right. He said there's two of them standing. He assumes the same two that they had run across earlier the day before, standing right where their fire pit was, like just curiously watching them fly away. And he said when they got back, Christopher reported this incident to his superiors because he was active duty, which later he told Daniel it was a big mistake. They put him on medical leave and they had him see a shrink, which is real horrible. You know, they dismissed him and they assumed it was stress of war caught up to him, and he had kind of a little break out in the wilderness of Alaska, right? He was based in Anchorage there. So that's what they dealt with. If Daniel ends up watching this on YouTube, he may. I'm going to send him a copy separately of the share. And Daniel, I appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate you sharing. That other stuff we discussed, that's under wraps. I won't get into that. But I want to thank you very much for one, your service. Appreciate that, because it's guys like you and all the other vets that allow me to run my mouth and be free and do whatever the fuck I want. So I appreciate that, and thank you guys. Also, I wanted to mention my tech guy last night sent me the link to Into the Fray Radio. He highly recommended it. I checked it out. I watched the Bigfoot in Oregon one. It was a pretty decent episode. So if you guys want, check that YouTube channel out. Let's see, what else was there? Interactive map on the website. Dave the Tech Guy nailed it, man. He did improvements, he updated it, and he's adding to it as we speak, getting things caught up there. Thanks to Dave the Tech Guy, and we will catch you guys on the next one.